Sometimes the proof of God's existence is sitting right in front of you. Hey, everybody, this is Gabe Kolstad with the Midweek Motivation episode of the Westside podcast, and I'm so thrilled to see my friend Cami sitting across the screen from me today. And I want to just, we're responding to a message that we were teaching on Sunday called A Reason to Get Out of Bed, the idea of getting your life on mission. And it's just so exciting to see somebody like Cami who's got a great story to tell. You're going to hear a little bit about it. But sometimes you just see God so actively at work in somebody's life that it's almost undeniable. Like, yeah, God has to be real. Look at what he's doing in that person's life. And so, Cami, welcome.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, I want to jump into some questions because people might not know this, but I've known Cami for a long time, used to be part of our church family here in the Portland, Oregon area, and has since had several different kind of phases of life. And Cami, I think it'd be really interesting to hear a little bit about your story, kind of where God has taken you through the years.
Yeah, I'd love to tell you. So grew up in Tillamook, Oregon, so about an hour and a half from you guys. My family's actually been in Tillamook for over 100 years. And I always knew I was one of those kids growing up that all my friends were like, I can't wait to get out of town, can't wait to move. And I was like, why would you leave? This place is amazing. So I think I kind of knew that I would come back to raise my kids, but I also knew that I would go away for college and that I would kind of experience getting away from home, but then coming back. So actually I was adding up. I was a part of your guys' church 15 years ago. So that's how long it's been. Okay. Is that I had to think how old my child was. And so I actually was finishing out my last year of college. I ended up going into elementary education and I was finishing up my degree at Pacific University, which is right down the road from you guys. And so when I was living in Aloha, I found your guys' church and started to get involved. But at that point in my life, long story short, my parents had gotten divorced my freshman year of high school, and it was just a really hard time for me identity-wise. I really didn't know who I was, growing up in a Christian home and then seeing a marriage broken. It kind of just shook everything that I knew to be true. So I'm like, okay, well, if this isn't true or this isn't lining up to what I believe, then who am I? And I couldn't have told you that I was having an identity crisis at the time, but looking back, I really just was very lost. And so that started me on a pretty tumultuous path of just drugs, alcohol. I'm just really trying to numb the pain of kind of what my experience in my high school years was based on some of that hurt. And when I came to your guys' church, I was really at a place. I had known God. I knew that I wanted to follow him, but I was just in this really double life, like coming to church on Sunday, praising Jesus, leaving and going to get high, drinking, just really living that double life. And I knew that I didn't want to do that, but I didn't have the tools to stop. And that's when you guys, I don't know if you had just started or what, but you guys were the first church to ever introduce me to Celebrate Recovery. And I started attending Celebrate Recovery, and it radically changed my life. So much so that I now had the tools to really say, okay, God, I don't want this in my life anymore. And now I've got a group of people. I was surrounding myself with a group of people at church and through the recovery program to really walk out that sobriety. And I can remember everything about the first time that the Holy Spirit just came upon me. I was actually taking a shower, spoke in tongues for the first time, which I had never seen. I grew up Nazarene. I didn't really see people speak in tongues. And it was at your church during a prayer. We had some kind of prayer something. And I was in a prayer group with this couple, couldn't tell you who they were. And they started speaking in tongues. And I was kind of like, I don't know what this is, but I love it. And that really opened up my heart to even just leading a more spirit-led life and just really for the first time walking into what it meant to rebuild that identity that I'd lost.
Wow. That's so interesting. Okay. Yeah. So you show up at Westside and there starts to be this turnaround, right?
Totally.
Okay. Do you mind giving us the next little season? What happened after that?
Yeah. So I ended up, I was finishing out my last class at college. It was actually a student teaching opportunity in Mexico. So I left, went to Mexico for 3 weeks to do some student teaching, just had this pretty radical experience with the Lord. Came home just like on fire. And my best friend, which was a guy at the time, went to your guys' church. And I remember going back to his house, and there was this guy there that I met, which fast forward ended up being my girls' biological father. So I got pregnant, even though I was really close to the Lord at that time. Made a mistake. I think you and I even talked about this afterwards of like, I asked forgiveness. I knew sex outside of marriage was not something that honored the Lord, but that God was still faithful to redeem that situation. Yeah. And I ended up giving birth to my daughter, Faith. And at the time, I was working in Salem at my first like big girl job, and I was a therapeutic foster mom for 3 girls, and I did not know I was pregnant when I moved there. And so it was cool because God allowed me to actually learn how to be a mom before I was actually a mom. And that program ended up, it was so cool. And that program ended up shutting down. But it was great timing because I had found out a month before the program shut down that I was pregnant with Faith. And so I was able to move home. And I don't know that that's what I would have chosen if that kind of hadn't been forced upon me. But I was a single mom. And like that was a really scary season in my life. But it was also, I was surrounded by family. So I felt supported. But the cool thing is that the sobriety journey happened 2 months before I got pregnant. So I was I was newly clean and sober. And I just always remember saying, thank you, God, that he so knew the path that he had for me that, you know, I never had to look back and be like, oh my gosh, I drank or, you know, did drugs with my baby. Like I was clean and sober. And I really, really was on such a great path with the Lord. And your guys' church was a big part of that. I remember getting up one Sunday, you had me speak. And I don't remember how this happened, but you had me talk about the difference between joy and happiness, and that happiness can come and go, but joy is that something that no matter what circumstances are happening, you can still have joy. And this was before I found out I was pregnant. So really those kind of messages and those things that were building in me, like I knew God had a plan. It's why I named my daughter Faith. Even if I couldn't see the future or what, I had faith that God was working all things out for good.
Yeah, you said something a minute ago that is so powerful as you were talking about how you knew that like sex outside of marriage wasn't what God was going to bless, but God is faithful. And I think there's so much power in that because, you know, not that we would want to walk into life and go like, well, since he's faithful, I can do whatever I want to and there's no consequences. But still, the point that as hard as we're all going to try, as much as we're all going to lean into God for his truth, his direction, his power, every one of us is going to mess up somewhere along the line. And thank God that the whole outcome of our lives is not totally dependent on ourselves, right? And our performance, that he has this thing called grace that rushes in. And I think it's so neat that you talk about God is faithful.
I still, when I hear that song, His grace is enough. Yeah. You guys used to play that song all the time at the church when I went there. I think we wore it out, You wore it out, but every time I hear it, it brings back that time because it's true. Like, I needed God's grace. And because here's the deal. When you're living in rebellion and when you're just doing whatever you want, you know you're outside of God's grace. Like you're literally walking whatever path you want. Well, here I had completely surrendered my life to God. Like for the first time in my life, I felt like I was truly doing what God had called me to do, you know, from all those years of doing whatever I wanted. And then I get pregnant. And it was kind of like, that cloak of shame, like I know the enemy wanted to just put that on me and have me just walk in that shame and completely derail me, but it didn't. And like to fast forward even a little more, I ended up getting pregnant a second time when Faith was 6 months old, same father, and got pregnant again. And I was just like, what in the world? Like, I was embarrassed. I'm like, really? Like again? Like this really does happen? And it was a lot harder for me to accept that because I felt selfish. I mean, here I am raising one baby without a dad, and I really had a lot of fears around what that would mean for Faith, you know, growing up without a dad. And there was no dad in the future. Like I didn't foresee what that would look like. And now here I am about ready to have another baby who also won't have a dad. And so it was a really scary time for me. And also there was a lot more shame around, wow, you get pregnant once, but you get pregnant twice? Like, come on. So it was, I was as single mom as it comes. Like, there was no other support. And I just remember leaving the hospital, like, with Aaliyah Joy is my second daughter, leaving the hospital with Aaliyah and Faith and just being like, God, can I really do this? Can I really raise two babies on my own? And I really had to lean into God's plan, because it definitely, I was not planning to be a single parent in my life. That was not a part of the plan I thought God had for me.
Okay, so what got you through that season of shame into, because I mean, now you're like in a completely different spot.
Totally.
Right?
Yeah.
What got you through that, and how'd you get to where you are now?
I think those seeds, like, again, like why it's so special me talking with you is, yes, those seeds were planted from when I was a young girl growing up in church, those seeds. But coming to your guys' church was the first time in my adult life that I was plugging into a church because I wanted to be there. Mm-hmm. So that really set me on the trajectory of like, okay, a church can be your resource. I remember there was a girl, Irene, which she'll probably watch this. Irene was the first person that I called when I found out I was pregnant, because we had connected at church. And so having those connections and knowing that there were people inside the church to really build community around, that's what I started to do, was really building relationships. I plugged into a church when I was back in Tillamook that really just supported me as a single mom, like really walking through that journey. I ended up, God is faithful to just every job that I got into ended up being just another personal growth opportunity for me to grow in the skills he's given me. I really thought I wanted to be a teacher. Quickly found out when I had my first small group of 32 second graders leading them. I was like, this is not for me. So I knew that I wanted to work in social services, but I didn't exactly know what that looked like. So he just led me job after job. Then I ended up working in the high school as an instructional assistant in the special ed department, and loved it. Loved that age, loved connecting, but I was so bored. There just wasn't enough, like, it was good relationship wise, like building relationships, but I wanted like paperwork. I wanted to like create. I wanted to like, do all these things. And I was bored. And so when I saw a job,
I've never heard anyone ever say, and I don't know if I'll ever hear it again, I wanted paperwork. That's fascinating.
I know. I knew there was something about me, because I used to say it all the time. I wanted more. Like, I wanted more admin. I wanted more creativity. I had no idea it would lead me to where I am today. So when I saw that a job opened up at Habitat for Humanity as the executive director, I was totally underqualified. Like, I had no experience in management at all, but I had been through applying for a Habitat home. So when I was a single mom, the girls were 1 and 2, I applied for a Habitat house. And I went through the entire process, all the things that it takes to be a Habitat homeowner, and ultimately was not selected. But I knew that God had a plan in that experience. And I actually ended up volunteering for Habitat because I believed in their mission and what they were doing. So when the job came open, I'm like, okay, God, this is perfect. And they ended up taking a leap on a girl that just had a lot of passion, but really no experience. And I ended up leading that organization for the past 7.5 years, and truly loving it. Like, just thrived. I was no longer bored. I had lots of paperwork, lots of things to be doing. And if you would have asked me even, a year ago, I would have told you that God created me for that job and that I would be there forever. And I really believed that. So, it's crazy. It's crazy how God's plan works out, because my mother-in-law, she recommended this book to me called Dream, I Dare You. And when she recommended it to me, I was kind of offended. Like, I am literally living my dream. Like, why would I need to read a book on dreaming? And I remember where I was sitting, and I remember listing off all the things in my head. I'm doing this, I'm doing that, like just all the things that make you prove that you're living the dream. But thankfully I love my mother-in-law, because I'm like, all right, I'll read the book with you. So I start reading this book, and by chapter 1, I was like, okay, I apparently don't know what dreaming is about, because this is not what I thought dreaming was about. And by chapter 4, I literally was sitting, I was at this huge Habitat conference, and I was sitting out in the sun on the chair, and I'm at chapter 4 of this book, and I'm like, okay, God, what do you want me to do with this information? Because everybody needs to read this book. Like, I was just so convicted by what it was doing in my own heart to just really like open up my heart to the dreams that God had put inside of me that I'd kind of just put on the shelf. One of those being 5 years ago, God had called me to start a ministry for single moms, and I didn't do it. And I was just like, no, I'm too busy. I've got, all these things. And it's called Embrace Grace. And I started reading this, and I was in like chapter 2. I'm like, oh, I forgot that I was supposed to do this. And so I ended up calling my pastor and saying, hey, pastor, I kind of forgot about this dream that God put inside of me. I think I'm supposed to start this group in my church. He's like, let's do it. Well, fast forward, now Embrace Grace has been running in our church for over a year. We've been able to take 5 girls, five single moms through this curriculum that is just radically changing their life. And that was just on chapter 3 of this book, right? So then I'm on chapter 4 and I'm saying, okay, God, what do you want me to do with this information? And he says so clearly, learn it for yourself first, and then you can tell the world. And I was like, the world? I thought he was talking about, all right, you can put it on Facebook. You can tell your Facebook friends you're reading this book, maybe put together a book club. Little did I know that 2 months later, I would quit my job as the executive director of Habitat, and I would go and work for the author who wrote this book. So I am now her director of operations. Today is our 1-year anniversary.
All right. Congrats.
And That's amazing. Been the best ride of my life. Really, our job is to awaken dreamers everywhere. And we do that by giving them the tools to bridge the gap from where they are to where they want to be.
That sounds exciting. I mean,
it is exciting.
Love that. So, I mean, I suffice it to say you like your job.
I love my job.
Yeah. You wouldn't say TGIF.
Never.
Thank God it's Friday. Yeah. No. You'd be like more excited for another week to start, right?
TGIM. Isn't that what we're coining it? Thank God it's Monday. Yeah. It's how I feel. There you go.
I love that. So I want to just kind of recap because, I mean, we just talked through years and a decade and a half of like all of this stuff in just a few minutes. There's been another little event in your life, and you have a mother-in-law, which means you also have a husband, right?
I got married.
Yeah, you did. So what's your husband's name?
8 years ago, my husband's name is Justin Aufdermauer, and he was my best friend. He was actually the first one to meet both the girls in the hospital, and so he actually brought me chicken enchiladas both times, just as my friend. Like, he was literally there just as my friend. And everyone at church says, yeah, we'd see you and Justin. Like, pretty soon you were sitting this far apart, and then you're sitting this close, and now you're holding hands. Now you're engaged. I mean, it was this beautiful transition of truly, like, we were just best friends. Separate couches. He'd just come over to watch movies. And we got married 8 years ago. And when the girls were in kindergarten and first grade, he adopted them. So both my girls now have the same last name. They were adopted, and we are just thriving. He's the executive director of the Chamber of Commerce here in Tillamook.
Okay.
Loves his job, passionate about community. We're super involved in our church. We go to Living Water Fellowship here in Tillamook, Oregon. Have amazing visionary pastors, and just have, again, just been able to plug in and just really allow God to work in our lives. And it's been incredible.
Yeah, and I get to have lunch with your pastor this Friday, by the way.
No, you don't. Oh, man, you're going to love. You guys are like cut from the same cloth. You're going to really love talking to each other.
Going to be fun. Okay, tell me if you can in just a few words. What's the most exciting thing to you about your mission now?
I know that I'm in complete alignment with what God has for me. Like, I love that I can't see the end. Like, I love that it's such a big vision that all I have to know is that I'm in complete alignment here, right now, and that I trust. Remember back when God said, I got to learn it for myself first, then I can tell the world. Yeah. I believe that I have a mission to tell the world this message, the message of Christ, the message of awakening dreamers, whatever that looks like and morphs into in the next, 20 plus years. So I think that's what I would say I'm most excited about is I I can't see an end to this. I can't see an end to where he's taking me. I just see opportunity.
That's pretty great because,
Yeah,
a lot of us have gone through those seasons where the opposite is true. It's kind of like, it feels like things are winding down, or, it's encroaching, like this fear or this, like lack or stuckness is encroaching. And it feels like God has just unleashed you for the exact opposite, which is pretty exciting to watch.
totally. Absolutely.
Yeah. How about this? I'm kind of curious because you've along the way made several big pivots, and those can be really scary for people.
Yeah.
How do you experience hearing God's voice in a way that gives you confidence that this is a new direction?
Yeah, I mean, huge pivot. Leaving
Yeah,
security at my job with
yeah,
Habitat. I'm Julia Gentry's her name. I'm Julia's, at the time, her only employee. So when she hired me, she was not looking to hire a full-time, salaried, exempt, high
hmm
professional. She was looking to hire somebody like part-time as a virtual assistant. So
hmm
it was a big leap for her. And for me, it was a big leap of trusting that she could financially pay me for years to come, kind
right,
of thing.
yeah.
So like that financial security was a huge leap. And I actually said no to the job twice because
Oh, okay,
for that reason. And just,
yeah,
I was 6 months away from having $30,000 in my student loans forgiven because I'd worked for a nonprofit for almost 10 years. So here
okay,
I was getting ready to decide whether or not to take a job, which it's not a nonprofit, which would mean I would lose out on being able to have my student loans forgiven. So my husband and I are sitting down and I'm like, hey, honey, like, I really feel like I'm supposed to do this. Like, I really feel like I'm supposed to take this job. But yet there's this financial piece. And my husband and I came to agreement that we were just going to trust God and allow him to figure the rest of that out. But it was a huge, huge leap. And I would say just God was consistent. Even in the 2 times I said no to the job, he consistently kept coming back and saying, you can. And he put people in my life. My mother-in-law was
okay.
my biggest cheerleader through this whole thing. In fact, one time I
Hmm.
sent her a message during my second time I was saying no to the job. I sent it to her and it was like, oh, maybe sometime down the road when it makes more financial sense, I can come work for you. And I sent that message kind of as a preview to my mother-in-law. What do you think about this? She goes, you want my honest feedback? Which I never said yes. She said, it's a little lukewarm. And I just remember being so mad at her because I knew it was. I knew that I was
Wow.
not leaping fully into what God had called me to do because it's scary. God-sized
Hmm.
dreams are scary. Like if you're not a little scared, then your dreams probably aren't big enough. And so like for me, it was just such a leap of faith, but God just kept coming back and just saying it over and over again. And I think that's what I've learned through this is just like God will persist in his message to me. Am I willing to listen is the question.
Oh, that's so good. Wow. All right. Okay. I want to ask you now kind of the flip side of that.
Yeah.
Because we've also all been in the place, and I know you have too, when you're not in the right place doing the right thing. Um, what are some of the signs, other than those messages from God and from other people, but what are some of the signs internally that you feel like it's time for a change? Does that make sense?
Well, I feel like when I was in that place of knowing I wasn't where God wanted me, there was a constant procrastination.
Mm,
Tomorrow I'll do something better. God, tomorrow I'll stop doing this. I mean, it was always putting the things that I knew I needed to be doing into the future. God, I know
mm,
someday I'll turn my life back to you, but today's not that day. Like it was
mm.
just like, it was almost like tomorrow never came. And it was just me
Yeah.
always reverting to it. It was just not taking accountability, honestly. Like it was putting it, oh, tomorrow. It's almost like that instant gratification. Well, if I say that I'll do it tomorrow, well, then I don't actually have to deal with it today. So that's how I lived a lot of years was just put it off, put it off, put it off. Because taking that decision, Julia has this saying like, pick your hard. It's hard either way you're going to choose. It's hard to
Yeah.
stay in active addiction. It's hard to get clean. It's hard to be healthy. It's hard to be fat. It's hard to have money. It's hard to be broke. I mean, both the things are hard. And at that time, I just wasn't choosing the hard that was going to get me to where I really wanted to go. I was choosing the
Mm.
hard that was keeping me stuck.
Wow. So maybe in a way, like when we're so infatuated with comfort, we
Oh,
probably ought to be asking a question. Is this okay? And maybe that's a signal that God has something else for us. Because I love what John Maxwell says. He says you should always be out of your comfort zone, never out of your gift zone. And
for
I think that's a
sure.
really great way to look at life. Yeah,
And the greatest
that's
showman,
great.
comfort is the enemy of progress. And I believe that.
Yeah,
Like I wasn't going
yeah.
anywhere until I got out of my comfort zone.
Mm. Wow. Okay. All right. What steps? This is like the word from Cami. What steps would you recommend for people who are out there thinking there's got to be more to their existence? They're looking for significance and impact. What steps would you recommend to them?
You have to be in a community. You have to. Like whether that's a church community, that could be the recovery community if addiction's a hard thing. That could be the business community. I mean, even with Julia, we have a dream storm mastermind group that dreamers have plugged into that allows people to connect and really dream alongside other dreamers. So I think that is key. When I look back over my years and what's got me to where I am, it's the people I've surrounded myself with. And I think that that
Hmm.
is the key first step. You have to look side to side and you have to see who's next to you. And if those people are not spurring you on, calling you higher, you have to get new people in your corner.
Ouch.
Yeah,
But
totally.
that's great, but hard too, right?
Totally.
And okay, if somebody needs to get new people in their corner, what should they do?
Well, I think first of all you have to evaluate who's in your corner. And what's the saying? Like
Mm,
you look around and the five closest friends next to you are likely a reflection of who you are. And we share that with our
hmm.
kids. Like you look around at your friends, they're likely a reflection of you and where you're at in your life.
Yeah.
So I think first of all evaluating who do I have around me? Do those people emulate the person that I want to be? And if not, you
Hmm.
have to find new people. And I think that that's even with your group that you're starting that I'm a part of, I'm getting to meet
Hmm.
people who are really focused on growth, not only with their relationship with God, but even in the business field. So if I know I want to grow in a certain area, I'm going to need to surround myself with people who also want to be on that same growth mindset. I think that's so important.
Yeah.
Get in
Yeah. Well, that's
church.
good
I mean,
advice.
that's, yeah,
Yeah,
I
get in
mean,
church.
you didn't pay me to say that, but get to church,
No.
people.
Love it. Well, Cami, we're so literally so proud of what God has done in your life and how you've learned to listen and move with where God is moving you, even though, yeah, lots of that stuff is hard, but it's cool to see how God has blessed you in such a big way, blessed your kids, blessed your family, blessed your marriage, blessed your community. And now your mission is something that, we know is going to touch a lot of lives. So again, if sometimes you're wondering, does God exist? Just like click this back on, go, wait, Cami can tell me that God exists because he's doing big things in her life. So thanks again for joining us here today,
Thanks for having
Cami.
me.
Yeah, and thank you all for watching and listening. We want to encourage you to do a couple of things before you say goodbye. One is, would you subscribe and share this content, because we know there's a lot of people out there that could use a positive story like this one today, and so please do share it. Another one is to stop by a Westside service any weekend. We'd love to have you do that either in person at our campus in the Portland, Oregon area or online at westsidecommunitychurch.com. But have a great week.